Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman, and I'll be your host here for the next hour on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Joining me in our cyber studio today is Carl Jones and Jeff Johnson. Carl and I are going to be discussing all things firearms. You're going to love it. He has a YouTube channel. We're going to tell you all about that. But before we get started, if you have any questions or comments during the show, we have a live chat on our YouTube Cerberus Radio Network channel, and submit them there or to Jeff or myself via private message on Facebook, and we will address those to Carl while we are live on the show. If you can't listen live, we do have a SoundCloud page. We encourage you to follow that. All of the downloads are free. If you follow, you'll be notified when we get another episode uploaded. And also, if you just feel like tuning in and seeing what's going on over here 24/7, Jeff Johnson has gone through great lengths to make sure there is content rolling on our streaming feature called Radio Co. It is pinned on my Facebook site, the Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report, and our Cerberus Radio Network page also on Facebook, and our fan page on Facebook, CRN. We also have discussions during the show on that thread as well, because unfortunately, I do believe that Google Hangouts is going to be going away. So we're not sure how long we'll be able to broadcast live on YouTube. So we're going to kind of transfer over and see if we can get people used to commenting on the CRN fan page. I think that would be helpful. But again, if you go over to Radio Co and just play it, we keep it family friendly. You can play it at work. You can play it in front of your kids. And we've got our shows here: Waking Up Cerberus, the Wasatch Report. Case in point with Dave Benner is one of the guests that I frequently have, where we discuss relevant Supreme Court cases. Kevin Gutzman was our first guest on that, where we discussed Marbury versus Madison. Dave and I have another one in the works as well. Spy Who Loves Liberty with Greg Junkbond Carpenter, as well as his shorter episodes called Liberty Minutes. There's some really informative stuff. Mike Meharry lets us play his podcasts on there, as does Dave Benner. There's always something really, really cool rolling. So I want to encourage you to follow and just tune us in and listen to Radio Co. That being said, Carl Jones, I want to welcome you to the show. How are you, my good friend?
Doing good. Glad to be here.
Tell people about you. Carl is a very good friend of mine. We actually met on Facebook, and I'll tell you right now, if it weren't for him educating me, nobody would know who I am. He absolutely changed my thinking. Today we're going to be focusing on guns, but he knows more about our founding generation, our history, more than probably 99% of the history professors or teachers out there, certainly more than anybody presently sitting on the Supreme Court. But that's a topic for another day. In fact, I'll be addressing that on Friday with Tom Mullen. We're going to be readdressing his issue, how the Supreme Court has destroyed consent of the governed. And also, if you didn't listen yesterday, Russell Sage from Naked and Afraid, we had a great topic on the show and on survivalism in general. But today we're going to talk about some personal defense. Carl, you have a YouTube channel. Just give us a quick background on you and your channel and why you started it.
Well, it's I don't know if I can tell you quickly. I of course, been into firearms most of my entire life, and in the military and all of that. And then after I got out of the military, of course, you don't get a lot of handgun training in the military. The rifle was our main weapon. Well, when I got out, I was always wanting to get into handguns, and I kind of began studying the masters, Jeff Cooper and Masad Ayub and various others, Elmer Keith, Bill Jordan, all these guys, and started kind of just building my own repertoire. And a few years ago, I decided to, I had a lot of people that would always ask me advice on handgun shooting and this and that. And so I decided to become a certified instructor and went through several classes doing that, and started teaching on my own, started holding my own classes. And what my YouTube channel is I kind of had the idea to set it up for two reasons. One is to reach people that are not in my area. I've had people from around the country say, "I wish I could take your class, but you're too far away." And then the other is because I've gotten to where I'm using it as sort of a precursor to my class. And I'm putting things on there like proper grip, proper trigger control, demonstrating how to do these things. And then I can send potential students, hey, go watch these videos. And when you get to the class, I'll be able to progress you through all of the talking, all the classroom time a lot quicker. And that way we can get out to the range a little faster.
Well, that's an excellent point, because as we were talking, I just want to let the listeners know, as I was listening to Carl, I have watched his videos. They are very comprehensive, very informative. And even if you've never taken a firearms class, and if you're just considering it, I strongly suggest you watch these videos. It's a fantastic introduction. And as you said, Carl, that gives a great foundation for you to expound upon that, and then kind of get them interested and get an education started for them before they actually get to the classroom. I think it's a great idea. That being said, what is the name of the channel? How can people find it?
They can search 11-75 firearms training, 1175 firearms training. And everybody asked me where the name came from. Well, that is the month and year that the United States Marine Corps came into existence. So
there you go. And again, subscribe to that one. You'll get notifications when they came up. Some of the topics you cover, and here's just so the listeners know where we're going to be going today, because Carl and I could probably talk till midnight tonight without even taking a break. But you had a recent video about purchasing a handgun, and that resonated with me because until actually 2010, I didn't own a firearm. I was living in California, and I was part of the indoctrinated that felt that if you had small children in your house, you shouldn't have one. I felt that I also did not know enough about firearms mechanically or how to operate them, that it would be smart for me to have one, not knowing this. And this is why, YouTube, all of this is really advanced since that time. This is why I encourage anybody who might be in the same position that I was to start watching these and get an education. And what happened for me, I just started looking online. I found a class in my area, and I went and took it. And it turned out it was actually a class for the CCW. And we're going to be talking about that also for Utah. So if you took this class in California, you could apply from California and get a Utah CCW, which, because of certain reciprocity benefits, would give you access or give you the ability to carry your firearm concealed in, I think, about 30 other states. Well, I never bothered getting it because I figured I'm never going to go to Utah anyway. And here I am living there. But after that, I was also invited to become an instructor for the NRA. Even though I didn't have experience with firearms, I am an attorney, and they need an attorney or active duty law enforcement to teach the legal aspect. That was section 3 of the personal protection course. And that is the elements of when the use of lethal force is justified. So that being said, I went through my training and then continued on with the firearms training as well. I have since, and we'll get into this later in the show, I've since abandoned my NRA certification just because of how they teach and some of their political issues as well. But Carl, let's give our listeners a sample. Yesterday or the other day, you posted a video about purchasing a handgun. And because that was so important for me, I was on Facebook getting advice from everybody on what kind of gun I needed. They seemed to know. You address that issue. Why don't you tell us the proper way of determining what gun is right for you for your everyday carry? And then we'll get into a little bit about the difference between what our everyday carry should be and what our selection should be, maybe for defense in the home, and how they might be similar and how they might be different.
Well, the first thing you got to look at is what is the gun going to be used for? I mean, and when and I limited that video. I didn't want to get into, because you can hunt with a handgun, and a lot of people collect them. A lot of people might do just competition shooting or something like that. And you're really, in most cases, you're talking about drastically different types, different calibers of firearms, from concealed carry or home defense. Now, with home defense and concealed carry, there's plenty of room for crossover there. Nothing wrong with owning one gun for both of those.
It's better than 0 guns.
Well, that's right, and I actually, I read an article years ago, and one of the magazines. This was probably back in 1990 or 91, and there was an article: "Beware the man with one gun, because he probably knows how to use it." And there's a lot of wisdom in that. I'm not. I hear the term gun rotation. I'm going to buy this gun and put it into my rotation. Well, you run into some problems if you're carrying 10 or 15 different guns. So really, narrowing it down to 1 or 2 is not. I mean, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, but you've got to, you've got to know which one is right for you. And one of the common mistakes people make, 2 common mistakes people make, is the husband who goes out and buys a wife or buys a gun for his wife without her involvement in the process. Well, that's almost always going to be a big mistake, because there's no way the husband can know what she needs. And
I think you
just
said when he does that, he ends up buying 2. One he picked, and then one she wants afterwards.
Yeah, and and then there are some husbands. Of course, I would never do something like this, but they buy a gun they want and tell the wife it's for her, and when she doesn't want it, the husband keeps it and goes and gets. So, all right, but
I'm sure that never happened at your house.
You should have seen the look on my wife's face when I told her I bought her a Model 19 357 Magnum. So, but buying a handgun is a very personal choice. We've all got different, physical characteristics, different hand sizes, different weight preferences. I mean, all manner of things. And one of the first things I tell people is assume a proper grip with the gun, and make sure it feels comfortable in your hand. You like the balance. It points well. One thing I left out of that video, I actually meant to put in there, was if you need to check to see that the firearm points well, and that means when I assume the proper grip and raise it up into my line of sight, I should be fairly well on target with what I'm aiming, what I'm pointing the gun at. That there's a kind of a natural process there. Of course, that's a developed skill, but some guns just point better than others. They're balanced better. They're configured differently, and so there's just a lot that goes into that. And you get into the caliber, debates, and of course everybody's got an opinion on that. And I frankly am of the opinion that the caliber debates are kind of stupid. There is some legitimacy to some of them in certain areas, but overall, as Colonel Cooper said, the first rule of a gunfight is have a gun. So,
thank you, Carl. Thank you, Carl, for saying what I constantly say in just about every debate on Facebook. When someone goes, "Oh, if it's not a 45, it's crap." Now, in defense, I used to be that guy.
Me too.
Now I carry a 9mm. Matter of fact, there's a 9mm on my side right now. I carry a 9 at work and off duty. So I've coalesced around it for a number of reasons, but it's for the fact that I can get number of rounds on target, where the 45 I don't get as many. With the 9, I can put a lot more on target. So anyway, well, I'll get you go back to that thought, but thank you for saying that, because that just really annoys me when people say, if you have to get this caliber. When you're purchasing a firearm, you get something that you can shoot, and you can shoot well. If that's a 22 Magnum, and my mom has a 22 Magnum and a revolver, and that's easy to shoot for a 78-year-old grandmother. It's not a 45, but it's a gun that you can put on target.
Carl, and Jeff, you're familiar with my firearms instructor, Louis Auerbach, who worked with Colonel Cooper for over 30 years. And I remember in one of the classes I was taking, and we would spend probably an hour and a half just talking about safety before every single class. And we had active duty SWAT members, police officers, and these class military veterans, and we still took the time to talk about safety. And I remember very clearly Louis saying one time, there is no magic caliber. My brother, he was talking about his brother, was killed with 32. He's seen other people hit with RPGs or, those big mortars and still surviving. I think we remember seeing somebody trying to take one of those out of a soldier's bodies. There's no magic caliber. It is shot placement. And he said also blind luck. You just never know. So I was also, when I was getting my information from, my Facebook advisors, that the 45 was the one to get. But if you have to compromise, get the 40, the ammo's cheaper, and so on and so forth. So I ended up, for a multitude of reasons, settling on a 40 caliber. And I ended up also getting a SIG 9mm, and I found I am faster, I'm more accurate, and I can also get on target quicker. And Carl, you mentioned getting on target just by holding the gun. Sometimes if you aren't as strong, the recoil on a larger caliber firearm, if you can't control it, is going to get you off target, and it's going to be harder to get back on if you have to get there quickly. So there's so many things to consider.
Well, that's exactly it. Target acquisition. You've got a lot of these firearms experts that 45 or nothing, or all I need is one shot. Well, they're watching too much TV. And the truth is that, number one, knockdown power or stopping power does not exist in a handgun. There is no handgun that has knockdown or stopping power. So you very rarely see a violent encounter ended through physiological means by one shot. So what does this tell us? It tells us we are generally almost always going to have rapid follow-up shots. And that's where target acquisition comes into play. You've got to be able to put rounds on target accurately and quickly. And here's what I always go to when I'm having these discussions. If I can fire 3 rounds from a 9mm in the amount of time that you can fire 1 or 2 rounds from a 45, I have actually delivered more energy foot-pounds, which is how power is calculated, into that target than you have with a smaller caliber, in a shorter amount of time. So assume you've only got 2 seconds. How many rounds can you place accurately with a 45 in 2 seconds versus a 9mm?
That's an excellent point.
Well,
go ahead, Jeff.
Right.
Go ahead.
And there is such a thing as the 21-foot rule, and you can figure this out, how far someone can go. There's a whole way to do all that. We're not going to get into that. That just take too much time. But anyway, so the number of rounds, that's drawing and getting on target and getting rounds off. With a 9, I can get some rounds off in 21 feet. With a 45, I may get one. I have one shot. If I miss, because I'm obviously going to be nervous, you're now in a world of hurt because you're not back on target again.
And that's right. And there's a very strong possibility of missing when you are under duress. Your muscles tense up. You got an adrenaline dump. You're sweating. Your palms get sweaty. You lose your fine motor skills, decline. Jeff Cooper said, I don't remember if I saw this, read it, whatever, but I think it was a video I saw him years ago where he talked about he knew world-class shooters that could drill a deck of cards at 50 yards with a handgun who had gotten into one-on-one encounters and missed a human being at 18 inches. That's what stress does. So the idea of one shot, one kill is bunk for a lot of reasons. You're almost always going to have rapid follow-up shots. And then, when you get into it, I mean, the wound channels, and I read a report from a doctor, an actual trauma surgeon, it came out 2 or 3 years ago. And there have been others that have followed suit, saying that when they look at actual gunshot victims, looking at the wound channels, they can't distinguish between a 9, a 40, and a 45. There's almost no difference. One is a larger, slower moving bullet. The other one is a smaller, faster moving bullet. And in actual conflict, they tend to produce very similar wound cavities to one another. So, to me, the training is going back to what Suzanne said about shot placement. You are going to be better off in a real situation with a gun that you can fire quickly, accurately, on the move, and training trumps all. Training is far more important than model, than make, than caliber, than ammo selection, than anything. If you're not training, I don't care what caliber you're using. There is no magic bullet.
When you talk about training, I want to expound upon that, because it is so much more important to train than simply go to the range and practice. And
That's right.
This is what I saw. And a lot of people don't realize this. They feel that they go to the range, they fire off some rounds, a couple boxes, they'll brag. I blew through 10 boxes of rounds, at the range today. Well, what did you learn? Did you actually improve your shooting, or did you just send a bunch of lead downrange? Did you improve your skills? And often what you see at the ranges are very draconian rules. You cannot draw from a holster, which is going to be important in a real life situation. I remember where I went in California after taking Louis' class, I got a range card where I was okay to draw from a holster, but they still have rules. No rapid fire. These are the things that you're going to need to practice, because if you get in a gunfight and you haven't practiced rapid fire and rapid target reacquisition, if you haven't practiced drawing from your holster and shooting, not just dry firing from your house and doing what you can do at home, and if you haven't practiced under duress, where you don't really get to pick the time, you see people at ranges sitting there and aiming, and I've done this, I'm talking about myself, aim, 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 fire at a piece of paper. And that's entirely different what I learned from Louis. So we first started out with the flat targets, the pieces of paper, and then we went to the humanoid targets, which, by the way, the NRA classes don't let you have. You just have the flat targets, white pieces of paper, no humanoid targets in those. So then he'd fold them and make them three-dimensional. Then we actually moved on to mannequins. Then we moved on to moving mannequins. But just sitting in there firing at a blank piece of paper isn't going to teach you anything. Get out there and take classes that will teach you, and I know this doesn't sound very politically correct, but will teach you how to shoot people, and do it in a manner where you don't hit the people you don't mean to, particularly if you're out in an area where there are many of them and you don't want to hit an unintended target. Because I'll tell you this, every round you send, they say, has a lawyer attached, but not only does it have a lawyer attached, it has police officers attached. It has a district attorney attached to it. It has a media, often an anti-friendly gun media, attached to it. It might have politicians that want to come up with some sort of solution to what happened. So if somebody is injured that shouldn't have been, that doesn't happen again. We see it all the time. Train, train, train. What say you, Carl?
Oh, hold on a second.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, and a lot of, there are things that you can train for in your home. I mean, I do encourage dry firing. In fact, I would say about 2/3 to 3/4 of your practice should be dry firing. But the purpose of it is because it will improve your trigger control. And when you go to live firing, you will see improvement. You can also practice in your home with an unloaded firearm, practice the proper draw stroke, practice your presentation, practice your target acquisition. But at the end of the day, those things should be building up to what you're going to do with live fire out on the range. And you need to find a range that will allow you to draw from the holster. And you need room to move, because if you're standing still while you're shooting, you're giving the other guy, the bad guy, a better opportunity to draw down on you. You're a stationary target, and that's what I try to start people out with, the bare basics, very similar to the NRA basic course. But what the NRA basic course is teaching you to do is to shoot. It's almost like they're teaching you to get into just basic marksmanship. And there's not any actual tactical shooting in any of their programs. Well, what I do is I use a lot of their stuff to get people, because a lot of people that come in have either, number one, they have no shooting experience, or they're self-taught and they've taught themselves a lot of bad habits because they've never had professional instruction. So I take them back to the basic foundation and say, look, we're going to start from scratch. I don't care what you learned in the past. It may be right, it may not, but what we're going to teach you here is right. But what I'm ultimately doing is I'm skipping through all of the fluff that's in that basic NRA course, and I'm getting them on the path to being able to shoot more tactically and more defensively in the follow-up courses. And by the time we're through, you know, they should be able to move while they're drawing. They should be able to assess the situation as their body goes into motion and that muscle memory takes hold, and their draw stroke, their presentation, the punch out, all of that stuff should be done without even having to think about it.
Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say to Carl, Carl, would you not agree with me on this, that one of the biggest problems that CCW people, concealed carry people, do is that they don't practice their draw and getting on target? Because drawing a concealed firearm is not as easy as you think. Most people out there that just think, oh, I can do it, I can get it out, and I'll shoot that guy that's trying to hurt my wife or whatever. If you're not practicing that draw, you might fail. You might even drop the firearm if you're not doing this, getting caught up in your shirt or a jacket or whatever it is, the clothing that's concealing it. You need to be practicing the draw, getting it past your clothing, getting it out and getting on target. Number two reason is because, like, I carry a compact, and it is a completely different feel than my duty weapon because it has a short grip and my bottom two fingers are out in the wind because it's a compact. So it's a completely different bit of shooting. You need to be practicing your concealed carry firearm all the time. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes most concealed carry people, they don't practice their EDC, everyday carry. So would you not agree with that assessment?
Oh, 1,000% I'd agree with it. I mean, there is, again, go back to the physiological reaction that your body is going to go through when you are faced with, imminent danger. You're going to get that adrenaline dump. Your muscles are going to tense up. You're going to lose, fine motor skills. And if you have not practiced that draw stroke and develop that muscle memory that is needed, just like it is in trigger control and everything else, there is a very, very large possibility that you're not going to either get that firearm out of the holster. You could fumble the firearm. Another reason that I put an emphasis on selecting the right firearm, and the first thing that I go to is look at the grip. If that gun does not feel comfortable in your hands, number one, not only are you probably not going to shoot it very well, but you're also it's going to add to the potential for you to fumble that gun when you go to draw it, because you should be able to put your hand on that firearm and assume a proper one-handed grip before it ever comes out of the holster.
At some point, Carl, I'd like us to revisit the issue here on the show. If we get started on this right now, that's it. That's the rest of the show. That's all we're going to talk about. But I want people to consider the benefits of concealed carry versus open carry. Because of the legal issues out here in the state of Utah, you have to get a permit to conceal carry, and you can open carry without a permit. And for me, ethically, I refuse to go through the DOJ, and that's where all the applications go through. To get my permission to carry a firearm. So, and I've also tried concealing even a small Glock 27. It's just really hard for me to do. And I am not an advocate of carrying a firearm in a purse, and it can be taken from you. You can forget your purse somewhere. You can forget that you're going into an area where firearms are prohibited, and that there's one, Ted Nugent's wife, it made the news. She went through security at an airport and forgot that her firearm was in a bag. TSA out here in Utah, Salt Lake City, at least once a week, somebody gets caught. And it's so common here in Utah, it's actually just an infraction because the state of Utah recognizes the firearm, mentality that we have here. It's part of our culture and tradition. So it's actually an infraction. It's less of a fine than a moving violation. However, The TSA will have their say, and forget the double jeopardy stuff. This is an administrative fine. They'll come after you with about $4,000, and that's even if it's unintentional. So I am not one that supports that. But let's talk a little bit about concealed carry. If you want to talk about the purse issue really quick, Carl, and we'll get into the proposed concealed carry laws, such as national reciprocity. Carl and I co-authored an article entitled "National Concealed Carry is a Trojan Horse." A lot of the gun rights enthusiasts cheer this on. Candidate Trump proposed support for national concealed carry reciprocity. And what that means is that Washington, D.C. would force states to comply or honor the concealed carry permits issued in another state that don't already have reciprocity. So California and Utah don't enjoy reciprocity right now. This would force California to accept Utah's concealed carry permits. A lot of people think that's a fantastic idea. And Carl and I are going to get into why that isn't. Carl, do you want to share your thoughts on a purse, carrying a firearm in a purse for ladies, or I guess gentlemen that have their packs as well? And let's move into the proposed legislation, because unfortunately, there are still a lot of people out there that think it's a great idea. And I think we did a fantastic job of explaining why it isn't a good idea. And a lot of minds were changed, but unfortunately, some still aren't.
Yeah, on the purse carry or off body carry in general, I'm opposed to it. I think it's a bad idea. I think that you hinder your ability to access the firearm. There are a lot of other repercussions that can come from it. But what I would say is, if you are adamant that you're going to carry in your purse, then you need to train to that method of carry. My first rule is don't do it. I could spend literally an hour explaining the reasons that it's a bad idea. I demonstrate in my classes a lot of times when the topic comes up why it's a bad idea. And you've got so many more viable options than the purse. So, my general rule of thumb is I try to discourage it. But if you're that person that I'm just not going to get through to you, well, then you need to train with whatever method that you're going to carry. You need to do that over and over and over again, and you need to really think through and plan that method of carry very well, because there's a lot more room for error in that scenario than there is when you are carrying the firearm on your person. As far, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I thought you were done. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, I'm done. I was just going to move into the national reciprocity from there.
Oh, well, I just want to add my 2 cents worth here on another method of carry that I really, really discourage people from using, and that's ankle holsters. Ankle holsters open 2 reasons why I discourage those. One is that you have to bend over, exposing your neck, your back, everything to a perpetrator that might be coming at you with a knife to get to that firearm, or you have to kneel down, still facing them, but now you've taken the ability to move out of the equation. So now you're stuck in one place, or you're exposing yourself to the threat by having to get down to get a gun out of an ankle holster. And I that goes along with your purse question, Suzanne. I just wanted to get that out real quick.
Well, another issue too, and this is if you are concealing, if that firearm becomes visible at all, either through your clothes or if you're sitting somewhere and your pant leg comes up, now you're considered to be brandishing, or it's printing. So you have to be aware that you are now in violation of the law. If that firearm, if you're open carrying and that firearm is hidden, you're in violation, even inadvertently. Or if you're concealed carrying and then all of a sudden now it's visible. I've had somebody say that their pant leg came up in a restaurant and then people complained, and and then there are issues. So again, I also did a show when I open carried about an incident where I went into a restaurant and I was told I had to leave, and just, I was within my lawful right, but it was a way of which we discussed the issue and worked with the restaurant owner to enlighten people. But the problem is when somebody sees that and they're in a public place and they're not comfortable, they will report you. I've been open carrying here in Park City, and there were sheriffs all having lunch outside by where we were, and somebody went up to them and said, "Aren't you going to do anything about that?" So tactically, strategically, I think concealed carry is a much better option if it is available to you. That being said, Carl, why don't you share your thoughts on national concealed carry reciprocity statewide across the nation?
Well, it's a bad idea. I mean, it's you are essentially surrendering your firearms rights to the national government, where you have less control, less representation, and that's going to lead to all manner of problems. I mean, if you look at what the national government has done when it has taken control of education standards, of marriage, of any number of things,
Health care, student loans.
healthcare, it has made it, infinitesimally worse. I mean, it's I can't fathom why anybody would think that the federal government forcing the states to recognize each other's permits. I don't know how anybody can possibly think that that's going to somehow expand your right to bear arms. It will do exactly the opposite, because with that federal control will come the one size fits all mentality of national standards. And who do you think the most influential states in producing those standards are going to be? It's not going to be Alabama or Georgia or Tennessee or some places that have good gun laws. It's going to be the most draconian states that will set the standards that we'll all be forced to comply with.
And if somebody's not familiar, when we're talking about the standards that we're referring to concern the training, the requirements for acquiring a concealed carry permit, and they actually differ from state to state. For instance, in California, we had to take a 2-day course. And even then, after the 2-day course that was approved by the California DOJ, then you have to go on your hands and knees and beg to the local law enforcement agency in charge of where you live. So if it's within a municipal district, it's going to be the local police chief. Or if you're an unincorporated county like I was, you had to go to the local sheriff. And in my county, Santa Clara County, Sheriff Lori Smith had a blanket policy. She was not going to issue them at all. And according to her assistant, when I called and said, "What's the deal with this?" he says, "Well, you have a Second Amendment right to have a gun in your home, but that's it." We're going to get into that, which is another problem of calling this a Second Amendment right. There's no such thing. But getting back to the concealed carry standards, California is a May issue state. So whether or not you get a concealed carry permit within that state is going to be up to the whim of the local law enforcement officer where you live. Utah, for instance, is a shall issue state. So if you are a law-abiding citizen and qualify to own a firearm, they must issue you a concealed carry permit. Now, whether or not that's accepted in other states is up to the states themselves. Here's the problem. If we have a national law forcing the states to accept each other's permits, California is going to say, "I don't accept." We take exception to those yahoos from Utah who only have a half-day course and no live fire training coming into our state. Our citizens here do not want this happening. Our citizens repeatedly elect officials who allow us and want us to incorporate these draconian gun laws. And now what happens, I'm going back to my law school experiences here. When we review cases, oftentimes you read in the syllabus from Supreme Court decisions are due to inconsistency in state opinions, this case is ripe for review. Well, what does that mean? California is going to challenge a national reciprocity law, and due to inconsistency in state requirements in the issuing of these permits, we're going to come up with our own set of standards. It will be an opinion, but it will be considered law. Do you think that's consistent with what's happening and how that does not conform to the intent of the Constitution, Carl?
Oh, absolutely, and I'll take it further than that. It will not only affect licensing or concealed carry permits and such as that. It will also affect magazine capacity, ammunition types, and a variety of other things. I mean, they could dumb it down to, okay, well, you can only carry this platform or that platform. You know, there's you and I, because we don't think like tyrants, cannot even imagine the limitations that could force on your ability to conceal carry. I believe California right now, if I'm not mistaken, is limits you to 10 rounds in the magazine. Well, that's problematic. If y'all saw the video I posted on my firearms page yesterday or a couple days ago, the police shooting in Athens, Georgia, two police officers had a wild lunatic running at them with a knife. He actually got a hold of one of the officers, and they fired well over 10 shots trying to stop this guy. So again, going back to, there's no magic bullet. If you're limited to 10 rounds, you know, how do these lawmakers know that that's how many it's going to take? And yet that will become part of what they will go after, is limiting magazine capacity, limiting the type of ammo that you can carry, as well as what it is required to obtain the permit. And it's going to be an absolute mess. And then on top of that, you're going to have the Supreme Court sitting in judge of all of these things. And you know, we could spend a couple of days talking about the problems that presents. So, you know, the founding generation believed that your rights were better protected by keeping them closer to home. And that's what federalism means. That's why the states are states, not colonies. They each represent a different culture. I mean, there are a variety of cultures between north, south, east, and west throughout the country. There are, you know, a lot of different, I would say, values differ from one area to another. And so, you know, federalism is the only way that our union of states can work. And especially, in my opinion, where firearms are concerned. I mean, I live in Alabama. I don't want people from Massachusetts determining what my firearms rights are, and that's exactly what's going to happen if you allow this into the federal realm.
Let me give you an example. Again, go ahead, Jeff, before I get into this.
Well, I just wanted to, because Carl hit on something here with this whole 10 round thing. New York State outdid outdid California for once in the SAFE Act. They made it 7 rounds. And what they found out was, and here's the real kicker, they failed to exempt law enforcement. So law enforcement was bound by the 7 round thing, and they scrambled afterwards. Oh my gosh, they figured out that they made a mistake, and they had to scramble to exempt law enforcement from it. And then they found out that nobody makes a 7 round magazine for just about any firearm outside of the 1911. And so no one enforces it here in New York because it's impossible to enforce it. I mean, they know it, and everyone just ignores it.
You know, I have a good friend, Robin, that listens to our show regularly, and she told me that in California, the requirements now, you have to not only apply and list every firearm, excuse me, that you are going to conceal carry, you have to test and pass a test on each one. And guess what? There's a fee involved in every one. What if, for whatever reason, you bring a firearm that somehow you forgot wasn't on there? Now they're going to get you, and you're going to be subject to criminal prosecution because the gun that you happen to have that day, maybe you had a malfunction. Maybe there's something wrong with the firearm. If you only have one that you qualified on, and you need to bring a different one, or you don't have the time to go and qualify for another one before you start using it, guess what? You're going to be subjected to probably state prison, knowing California. So We don't have those requirements otherwise. So look for nationwide, pardon my French, requirements for testing. Look for nationwide, extremely long waiting lists. It takes weeks or months to get approved in California. Wait until everybody now is mandated to go through all these checks and all these testing. And that's exactly what I see the Supreme Court doing, is saying, okay, well, we're going to decide what are some safe standards. The state has a compelling interest to ensure that all firearms owners are properly trained. Therefore, according to us, we're going to impose these restrictions. If you're going to carry across all 50 states, expect the gun law standards more like California and less like Utah, Arizona, Wyoming. So those of you that live in a state where you can get a permit easily and you want to impose your state's will on California, guess what? It's going to go the other way. It is a very, very short-sighted view where you're just like, we're going to get our way. We've already had one presidential candidate, two actually. Eric Swalwell from California said if people aren't going to surrender their guns and they want to go to war over it, well, we've got the nukes. It'll be a short war. Really? You just threatened gun owners who don't want to surrender their firearms with nuclear weapons? Kamala Harris, when Trump started doing his executive orders and I'm going to issue this and everybody's cheering on, well, I said, you better watch it, because if you're supporting legislation via executive order, Kamala Harris, I will give Congress 100 days to enact gun control. If they don't, I will do it by executive order. Let's say national reciprocity has been enacted. Carl, do you think it would be completely out of the realm of reality to have a lunatic like Kamala Harris say, I heretofore rescind all national concealed carry permits?
You can't put anything out of the realm of possibility. And the thing is that there are myriad examples of what will happen and how your rights and the effects of this will decline. One that should be blatantly obvious to anybody paying attention is education. I heard the quote, I can't recall who said it, but somebody made the point years ago that in the education system, we have gone from teaching Latin and Greek in middle school to teaching remedial English in college.
Yes.
And that decline of education standards coincidentally happens to coincide with the time frame when the federal government began involving itself more in educational standards. So you have a rapid decline. You've got people now coming out of college and high school that can't write a coherent paragraph, and this is all traceable back to the involvement of the federal government in the education system. Well, guess what? You're going to have the same bureaucracy in charge of your firearms rights. Why would any rational thinking person believe that would be a good idea?
Well, again, this lack of education with regards to our political system. These people, as you mentioned, become our future legislators. And if you look at the proposed national reciprocity law, you're going to laugh when I tell you this, but apparently proposed laws have to start with a statement of constitutionality. They justify the statement of constitutionality in this law on the Second Amendment. And people don't understand. Carl, tell me, let's talk for a little bit about the difference between state and federal gun regulations.
Well, the only under the Second Amendment, it says that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so it dealt with that amendment was put in there. Number one, it was a restriction against federal powers. It was never held to apply to the states. In at least the first 100+ years of the existence of the Union, or the ratification of the Constitution, it was always regarded as a restriction against the federal government. And if you go back to the debates that formed it, it's very clear that it didn't apply to the states. But the what it dealt with was preventing the federal government from arming the militia, or from disarming the militia, because Article 1 of the Constitution says that the Congress may arm the militia. Well, various states reasoned that if they can arm the militia, they could also refuse to arm them or even disarm them. So the Second Amendment was put into place, and it restricted the federal government. Well, then you've got to revert to the 10th Amendment and see that the states were in charge of the militia. They were organized. The militia was organized by state, and so regulations by the states where firearms are concerned are perfectly in keeping with the Second Amendment, because they are in charge of their militia, and that the militia being, as the founders defined it, every able-bodied person. Okay, so you've got, again, it goes back to federalism. This is what the separation of powers refers to. With state control over your firearms, you've got a louder voice, much louder, in your state and your local area than you do screaming at Washington, D.C., where you have virtually zero representation. I know people say, well, you got a congressman. Well, sure, you do, but he also represents 750,000 other people. And if you think that you're going to, your voice is going to be heard, well, you're throwing rocks into a well. It's not going to happen.
No, you're absolutely correct. And this is what I tell people all the time. Again, people say, then, well, what part of shall not be infringed do you not understand? And the problem with a law like this is it opens the door for them to infringe it. And if you look at the pattern of Washington, D.C., they have always infringed. 1934 Firearms Act, blatant disregard of the Second Amendment. And when people say, well, the Second Amendment applies to such and such, you have to remember it applies to the general government only. But then they say, well, nobody can infringe upon our rights. But again, as you said, Carl, you want to start thinking locally and have at least a chance of effectuating a change where you live. I couldn't do that in California. So thanks to federalism, I moved to Utah, where I could enjoy my firearms rights. They're not a Second Amendment right. It's a Second Amendment restriction. You can read our article. It's National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Bill is a Trojan Horse. It was published by the 10th Amendment Center. If you go to SuzanneCSherman.com under Suzanne's articles, you will find that. Carl and I also wrote another one. I believe we shared it about the AR-15. But again, people are under this misconception that the Second Amendment applies to every state. If you grant Washington, D.C. that much power over an area in which they were never delegated, they are going to abuse this power. Again, we've had presidential candidates say they will act on gun control via executive order. I would prognosticate that concealed carry on a national basis would be one of the first items to be taken away from us. Again, we're seeing the extreme risk protection orders. The general government has exactly zero respect for constitutional authority. Then we have the argument, well, they're not infringing upon our rights at all. They're actually extending them. Again, wait till we have those in power that are even more unfavorable to our gun freedoms than we have now. Give them this power, and they're going to act on it, and it's going to end badly for us in the long run. Carl?
Well, and the thing that needs to be taken from this is, you and I are not anti-Second Amendment by any stretch of the imagination. We're pro-Second Amendment, but we are pro-proper application of it, and we take the position that we take not because we want your state to limit your firearms rights, but because we believe that federalism is the safest bulwark for your firearms rights. We are trying to expand your right to bear arms, and surrendering those rights or putting them in the federal realm is going to do the precise opposite of that.
Absolutely correct. Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do, because what it really comes down to, if you apply it properly, because what it was, Article 1, Section 8, nowhere in there was the federal government granted authority to regulate firearms in any manner. They were given the ability to arm the militia when they were called up to federal service to repel an attack, such as when the British attacked in the early 1800s. They would call up the militia, they'd arm the militia, and they would fight. Now, what Patrick Henry and George Mason were afraid of is that they would use that to disarm them. So that's why they pushed for the Second Amendment to be further declaratory and restrictive clauses against the federal government to make sure they understood they had no authority to infringe on the firearms. And which is the better spot to be in? One where the federal government has no authority, every firearms law is unconstitutional in the federal realm, or one where you give them the power to just pick and choose what laws they want to enforce on everyone.
As we wrap up the show, do you have any closing comments on national reciprocity, Carl, before I move on real quick?
No, I think that, pretty well covers it. I would just tell people, go read the article.
Yeah, we'll post it again on the page. A lot of people have shared it. And again, I've gotten a lot of reports from people reading this and saying, you know what, you've actually changed my mind. Other people will read it and say, yeah, you know what, I understand the history, but I don't care. I want this anyway. And you can't really refute that. I don't care. I want this anyway. That's fine, but you're really laying a trap for a lot of other people. And it's a short-sighted, again, admission that you really don't care about consent of the governed. So, I want to also get into the NRA. The NRA is very supportive of this. I've gotten calls from them. I used to be a member. I received my firearms certification from them, which, like I said, I allowed to expire. I never renewed. And they called me one time and said, we want to let you know we need your support. We're working with Congress. We're fighting Congress against their gun control, but we're also working with Congress for favorable legislation. And I said, this is where you lose me. Congress has zero authority over this, but as long as you keep engaging in this battle and legitimizing their unconstitutional and unlawful role with regards to firearms laws, you're showing me that you're really disingenuous. The NRA, the ILA department is really more about raising revenue than they are protecting our gun rights. And so that was really my issue with them. My second issue with them, and I know we have to wrap up the show, Jeff, is that when we were training, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're not allowed to actually train in a manner that will make you an effective shooter in a public setting. Also, the political correctness of their courses. We were actually instructed to never refer to our gun in the classroom as a weapon. So to me, I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. And I understand, Carl, that you're going to be developing your own curriculum that's going to be independent of the NRA standard.
Yeah, I've already actually begun in that. And there's a number of reasons for it. Some of what you just covered. The NRA, it's almost like they don't really want to teach you how to shoot. I mean, their basic course, you spend a lot of time talking about, when they say basic, I mean, it is very basic. I'll put it that way. And not to say that that's a bad thing. It's just that there are discussions in there that are more pertinent to self-defense. And the basic course is not a self-defense course, number one. Number two, it's not even really preparing you for self-defense. Then when you to go through their defensive courses, which is personal protection in the home, personal protection outside the home. Again, there are some good elements in there. There are some good, the part of the classroom time is very well done, but the shooting scenarios are what I would still consider very basic. So, what I'm doing is cutting out a lot of the classroom time. I'm cutting down on that, moving people to the range quicker. And I'm trying to get them far more advanced in their shooting on day one from what they would get by going, probably through all three of the other classes, because then I want to move them to the next phase, which is going to be now we're coming out of the holster. We're shooting on the move. we're engaging multiple targets, and that sort of thing. So,
and Carl, we're running out of time. Real quick, tell everybody how they can subscribe. You have a Facebook page as well, so tell them how they can find you on YouTube and Facebook.
yeah, they can just look up 1175 Firearms Training. It's on Facebook. There's a link to my YouTube channel there, or they can go to YouTube and look me up. If they have any problems, just contact me through Facebook, and I'll help them.
Awesome. And on that, we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Carl Jones joining us. Thank you. I'm Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.